This is Toledo Symphony Lab, a behind-the-scenes look at the world of classical music from WGTE Public Media and your Toledo Symphony. I'm Brad Cresswell. Joining me today are the Toledo Symphony's president and CEO, Zach Vassar, principal second violin and artistic administrator, Merwin Siu. We also have the TSO's marketing director, Felicia Canny, and a special guest, Rachel Zeithamel, who is director of education for Toledo Symphony. We have a full house this morning, and we have some fun stuff to talk about. Actually, a lot of things to talk about, which all come under the umbrella of the North Star Festival. Before we talk about some of the performances that are going on with the North Star Festival, why don't we talk about what the North Star Festival is? Felicia, you want to tell us about that?
Yes. So a little known fact about Toledo, Ohio, is that it's a part of this expansive network called the Underground Railroad, which is this network of safe havens for slaves to get from stop to stop safely and to get to the north to freedom. So in this North Star Festival, we put together these programs that include, some events that are ticketed and others that are more community outreach oriented to celebrate our part in history and celebrate the musical contributions of Black Americans from 1850s through the 1960s. So that's kind of the definition of the festival, and I'm sure Merwin, Zach, and Rachel can touch upon how it came about programmatically.
So when we were putting this together, we reached out to our friends at the Lathrop House to really understand the significance and the symbolism of having this Underground Railroad stop in our area. And that led us very quickly to the Toledo-Lucas County Public Library, who has been a wonderful partner from a literary perspective and a historical perspective as well. And when we started looking at our programs, some were already in place, some had yet to be put together, but we realized that we had an arc starting with Negro spirituals in the 1850s all the way through to an opera that the Toledo Opera is presenting, I Dream, which celebrates the last 36 hours of Martin Luther King's life. So you have this arc of spiritual to R&B, and then along the way you have stops in chamber music and in jazz, and you can start to really see the contributions start to create a timeline. Yeah.
Now, some of the stuff has already happened. I know some of the concerts. We have a chamber concert coming up, but Rachel, you want to tell us about some of the early stuff in the festival? And it involves some student performances, right?
Oh, yeah. We're trying to do something that will appeal to every different age. So as part of our Young People's Concert, which is geared towards homeschools and parochial private schools in the area, we had the concert was titled Lift Every Voice, Musical and Historical Legacy of the Underground Railroad. And what I really appreciated about that was just the chance to work with a lot of different schools. When we first met with Lathrop, and Merwin and I met with our friend Sally over there over a year and a half ago, and we were talking about doing this, and we're like, I remember saying to my friend Sally, like, what gives me the right, a white girl from Nebraska, to think that I can educate kids about this like crazy social subject? And so that's what we kind of have kept coming back to. We've relied on a lot of community partners to educate us. And part of that is then we get to educate others. So we try to include a lot of information for teachers in our teacher guide for the Lift Every Voice. And that was really fun, really rewarding. A couple of the other events we've had, Zach mentioned our partnership with the library. We did a preschool story time, which again was geared towards preschoolers, and the Toledo Symphony String Quartet played and accompanied a couple different books. Yeah. And then we have also had we had the Toledo Symphony Youth Quartet go out and do an instrument petting zoo geared towards more elementary and junior high schoolers.
Yeah. What was the reaction of the younger kids? Let's start with the preschoolers, and how did they take this kind of a presentation?
I think so. The preschoolers in particular, I don't think they understood the seriousness of the matter, but they appreciated the musicians, of course, the live music, but also the way that the story time worked was they were talking about following, one of the books was Following My Father's Song, and it was how you communicate in this case, it was whales, but how the whales communicated with each other, and you could always follow your father's song to know where to go. And so she kind of tied that into when the slaves did escape and the music. So they didn't grasp the seriousness of the nature. Mm-hmm. They just thought they were hearing some good stories, listening to some good music. Yeah. So it was a really good experience. Merwin might be able to add a little bit more since he was there providing some of the music.
But it's laying the groundwork, right? I mean, for these kids to carry that with them into the future.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that's readily apparent the more you kind of dig into the legacy of Negro spirituals is just how prevalent they are in our society now. How so many of the melodies, so many of the words have kind of permeated our consciousness. So even if the specific context behind utilizing a particular spiritual like Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, or Every Time I Feel the Spirit, or Going Home, doesn't necessarily sink through at that moment. It is kind of building that foundation of, the type of melodies that really are part of our culture and part of what kids growing up will be able to kind of bring into some of the more advanced concerts that we're going to be doing in the future.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's nice to see those songs, brought into the environment at a young age for children, because when you think about it, like children's nursery rhymes or kids' songs, things like that, they often have like this dark undercurrent to them,
Well, that's like not creepy.
Ring Around the Rosie
exactly.
is about the plague and people
dying
and burning the bodies with ashes and things like that. So, and think about children's tales. They're often about laying the groundwork for scaring that child into submission, like the Grimm's fairy tales. And if you don't behave, you'll get,
I need those books.
Eaten by
I feel like I need them right now.
For yourself or for your daughter?
Yes.
These little cautionary tales.
They are, but I think what we're all realizing is that they become part of the lexicon from our harmonic perspective or our melodic understanding. I'm thinking about Going Home is something that appears in Dvorak, and it was performed at Kennedy's funeral, and it has started to lose maybe its original context, but it's taken on a lot of other ones. And that's what music does really well. But one of the more rewarding things about working with the library is finding all these great ways to communicate with young children about the Underground Railroad and about slavery. Mm-hmm. Rachel found this wonderful book called Unspoken, which was shown at the Young People's Concert, and then great music was played along to it. So it kind of created this sort of visual musical ballet in your mind of how music and art can go together.
Well, and of course, Symphony is addressing these social issues through music and through collaboration with other community partners. But I think that as a whole, as a society, we can't limit ourselves dependent upon our own background. You talk about being the white girl from Nebraska and being, feeling a little weird about having to come out and trying to educate people about the sins of slavery and what happened in this country. But if we allow ourselves to, close off, then we don't move forward. I think that it's something that needs to be addressed on all fronts.
Exactly. And I mentioned that white girl from Nebraska comment on presentation a couple weeks ago, and I got a phone call from a lady who's like, I really appreciate that, because aren't we all just white girls from Nebraska? And I was just like, okay, but I get her point. Like, that's the person that needs to be figuring out this stuff.
Yeah. I'm going to think about that for a while. The white girl
am I
from
a white
Nebraska.
girl?
I think you are.
I want to go back to your point a little bit about, kind of what gives an organization the right to speak and the right to educate. And I think it's really important that when any organization enters into this, that they see this as part of a conversation. Mm-hmm. We're not just here to educate. We're not here to speak. We're here to listen, and we're here to learn. And I actually think the most important part of the North Star Festival, and maybe this is a bit Toledo Symphony-centric, is the learning that we're going to get as an organization. We're going to I think it's important for us to learn how to speak about social issues and how to learn about social issues. And I think that maybe it's not so much, we're what gives us the right to speak as we want to be part of a conversation. And I think that we've reached out to a lot of organizations, and other organizations have been just wonderful in giving us great feedback. Not just the organizations that we mentioned, but also some of our collaborative performing partners, the Clarence Smith Community Chorus and the Voices of Bowling Green State University. They've just given us so much in terms of how we can be better partners in our larger society as a whole, but specifically reaching out to the African American community. So really, really great learning experiences for us.
Who first came up with the idea? Who first started talking about it, and how did it develop? Do you remember at this point?
I think it started as a Toledo Symphony venture when we started to realize that we were going to celebrate jazz through classical music and spirituals in classical music. And that arc made us think about it. And then our friends from the opera asked us to consider adding an extra performance, since we play in the opera's pit of I Dream. So then we suddenly transferred across that 110 years that I referred to earlier. And the idea of doing a festival started to be born. And I think it was Merwin who came up with the name of it, which I really love. The concept of the North Star, which was the guiding light for those on the Underground Railroad, the logo that our marketing team created has the Big Dipper incorporated into it, which includes the North Star. We have to be careful, because in a radio format like this, it's really easy to sound like we're congratulating ourselves for having a good idea.
Right.
From my perspective, this is an idea that we should have had a long time ago. It's overdue, and it's something that for our community, it's a celebration that we should share. And so it doesn't end up being, was it a Toledo Symphony idea? Was it an opera idea? Was it a Toledo Lucas County Public Library idea? It was something we built and something we're really proud of, and it's something that I think the community deserves. And that's what I think we should really be patting ourselves on the back for. Yeah.
It's rare that you have this many different community organizations coming together under one big event, right?
Well, it's true. And one thing I am really proud about is that we received an NEA grant to support this festival. And one of the things that I think put us over the edge on that is the sense of collaboration. This is the first NEA funding the Symphony has received in years. And when you put all of these organizations together as co-presenters, you start to realize that that's really what starts to raise eyebrows, not only in this area, but nationally, for somebody as lauded and selective as the NEA.
Well, coming up this weekend is that program Romance and Spirituals, and I know, Merwin, by the time that this airs, you'll have already given your little talk about Romance and Spirituals and the idea behind it. I wonder if you can give us sort of a little kind of a capsule version of that.
Absolutely. I think one of the wonderful conundrums that I approached programming this concert with was the fact that the words in spirituals are so incredibly important. They convey such meaning. They often have meaning behind the literal meaning. And yet there have been so many presentations of spirituals in chamber music that take the words away. And what is particularly unique about a spiritual setting without the words? And I think with Romance and Spirituals, we're exploring kind of what's incredibly poignant about this music, even when you take away the message, even when you take away how much of that message is just in the melodies and the harmonies itself. And I think that's what we're trying to explore in this program. We're taking that both in very literal presentations of the spiritual, where basically you're just taking a vocal melody and putting it with an instrument, and it's roughly almost a direct transcription. We're seeing what happens to the music when you take the spiritual melody and kind of treat it as a raw material for a more abstract compositional process. And then we're seeing how the spirituals inspire folk songs, pop songs, and all of these different presentations that extend, into the 20th and 21st centuries. And I think, like, how do spiritual inspired melodies serve as historical markers? How do they serve as inspirational anthems? I think all of these things were really, really interesting for us to see how many composers were inspired not just by the words and the messages of the spirituals, but just by the sheer beauty and poignancy of the melodies themselves.
Yeah. So is the program then featuring all music of African composers or African descended composers? Or do you have other arrangements of that? I mean, you mentioned Dvorak, for instance. There are plenty of, dead white male Europeans who arranged and used spirituals in their work. Are you touching on any of that?
Actually, no. In this case, we are focusing. There is a composer of African-British descent, so it is not entirely African-American composers. But if I recall correctly, and I'm desperately running through the program in my head, hoping that I did not make a mistake. Yes, there are, I think it is all composers of African descent, and there are several composers who are currently still living. We are really grateful to have found some wonderful compositions by female African-American composers.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that, certainly woefully underrepresented, and I think,
absolutely,
and some really great pieces here. So we're really excited to present these.
And these are all, it should be said, in the classical style, because I mean, in the classical world of music, right? Because it's not hard to find living female African American composers of other types of music.
We did want to find pieces that at least that did have one foot in a classical style, but also one foot that maybe kind of extended outside of that. So we have pieces that are in a folk tradition. A wonderful piece by Rhiannon Giddens, who's recently received a MacArthur Award, and she's the lead singer of the Carolina Chocolate Drops, and she has this wonderful arrangement of her song at the purchaser's option. She collaborated with Jacob Garchick and the Kronos Quartet to create this arrangement.
Right.
And then there's a piece by Daniel Bernard Romain, who's using very specifically hip-hop techniques in his tribute to Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
So that bridges gaps from really kind of, I would say, academically treated anthems. There's an isorhythmic movement that he's using that's very, very specifically related to that classical tradition. And then he's using a very strong hip-hop influence in the movement Clap Your Hands.
Yeah.
Is there an audience participation component?
There can be.
Oh, okay.
It is an optional audience participation component. We are going to explore that. We'll see how it
Oh,
goes.
really? I'm interested.
Yeah. Well, we're going to kind of see how that works. It is it's a pretty intricate clapping part. So we'll see how. Yeah, it was a little harder than we expected.
So it's not like clapping the beat.
It's
It starts
to,
that way.
Oh, really?
It does start that way.
hard to clap your hands and play the violin at the same
Maybe
time.
like a full-on body percussion or something.
Yeah. There you go. Well, you mentioned that Rhiannon Giddens Kronos Quartet thing, and now didn't the Toledo Symphony Youth Quartet play that or play an excerpt from that? Yeah, here in the studio. But they're not playing on the concert, though, right? Or are they?
They're not playing on the March 11th concert.
Okay.
They've done some other outreach concerts for us with that piece.
Yeah, wonderful players. Now, you're doing something interesting that I don't know that I've seen this done before. I mean, usually symphonies will do this sort of thing for donors or for people who have some kind of relationship with the symphony where you open up a rehearsal and people can come in and watch and see what goes on behind the scenes. But you're doing that for the chamber concerts, Romance and Spirituals, a rehearsal in the afternoon.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. So the day of the concert, we're going to be at the public library downtown and open rehearsal. It's going to be interesting. It's in a new space for the musicians, and there will be people walking around. We've invited, it's open to the public. It's in the middle of the library, so anybody and everybody will hear what's going on.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about that. And the musicians are on board, kind of sneak peek behind the looks, see what's going on.
So are you going to let the members of the public say, well, you should do a little faster, maybe do a little slower?
They can say that, whether or not the musicians listen.
One of the things I love about this is, and I remember in one of our first meetings with the library, was the idea of making noise at a library. Back when I was growing up, we were still being shushed at the libraries. But I had a great conversation with Rhonda Sewell about this, which is that libraries have traditionally been safe places. They've been community centers and places where people come and go through the community to learn about something. And all the more reason to make that a forum for music and this music. So this is, I think, the first time that chamber music will be played by the Toledo Symphony at the Winter Garden at the main library. And I'm very excited at this idea of, passers-by on a random afternoon getting to see and hear this music in a space that otherwise was a shush.
Yeah, I love that idea. Let's make noise at the library.
Yep.
I'm sure you can find lots of other. You can do an entire, Make Noise at the Library festival next year.
Sponsored by WGTE.
There you go. Well, we have done a remote broadcast from down there. We're going to do another one with the iDream project. And we're going to be talking about Kathleen Battle coming in next week, I believe, and the week after that we'll talk about iDream. So this North Star Festival conversation is going to be going on for some time now. Can you tell me, where do you go from here after you've brought together all of these organizations, you've scheduled all these wonderful concerts, you're raising awareness with the public, you're engaging with the public? I mean, I'm willing to guess that there are a lot of people who are not even aware of the Underground Railroad connection in Toledo. What's the future hold, do you think?
Well, I think it's really important for us to be able to come back together as an organization and ask ourselves internally, what have we learned? And I think it's a little bit early for us to kind of leap ahead with grandiose projections of future programming without being able to kind of look back and say, oh yeah, this really worked, this didn't work. And I think so maybe there will be a period of reflection where we kind of see where, what's working for us. I do think that we have already, as an organization, been more cognizant of what the diversity of our programming can be, and not just programming, but the people who are on stage, conductors, soloists, and I think the ultimate conversation, the one that's probably the most difficult to have, is the members of the orchestra. How does that reflect? How does that reflect in terms of providing positive role models for children of all colors? And I think that's a very, very difficult conversation. It's a conversation that some orchestras have already started to have, and we haven't really. But I think it is something that we will be looking at, and I think it's learning that is timely. It's beyond timely. So I think that maybe we're certainly very excited about doing other programming and possibly festival programming. Not necessarily sure this is going to be that North Star Festival Part 3, the return, or something. will necessarily be how we go about it.
I look at the overall arc. I mean, one of the first concerts after I came to the symphony that we did was a collaboration with the National Arab Orchestra. And that was a party that went way into the wee hours of the morning, where I think the Toledo Symphony was seen in a different path than they'd been seen before. And it was a different light that had been shining on the repertoire. And that starts a kind of a dialogue. What can we do with music? We don't have to just be music of a bunch of European dead white males. And we can start to use music to inspire discussion. It doesn't mean that we take a position, but we inspire dialogue. And I think we'll do that with this festival. We already have some things planned for next year, which we haven't announced, that will be provocative. But as we go into our 75th anniversary, one of my favorite concepts is this idea that we aren't just waving a flag and saying that we're 75 years old, but we can really say that for 75 years we've been part of this community. We've been Toledo's symphony for 75 years. In order to do that really credibly is to look at all of the parts of the community that we can inspire, and we can do that through music.
I like his answer. You said his answer.
I mean, diversity is always a hot button topic, especially for arts organizations that tend to be much more mired into traditional European, history. And that's the kind of music that you have to play. Your audience expects it also, but I think that it's great that there's at least an awareness and an attempt to extend the conversation, right? To include people of all different races and all different colors, because they have something to offer that speaks to your audience, even to your core audience as well.
I think one of the things that we've really discovered in putting together this festival is we've really been just stunned by the depth of the local history that ties into the Underground Railroad, and I think while there are, people are aware, or many people are aware of the Underground Railroad stops, not just in Sylvania, but even just a little bit further south of Toledo. I do think that it's not really part of Toledo's maybe self-consciousness that James Ashley, who was a former congressperson from Toledo, was the person who authored the 13th Amendment that eventually was the amendment that abolished slavery. And I think that's an incredible history, and we're discovering more and more of this history that we just have not come to, that we haven't been able to, pay tribute to in this first iteration of the festival. And I think part of being Toledo's symphony is being able to highlight this incredibly rich history that's part of this city.
Well, that's just about all the time we have. But I do know, Rachel, you want to touch on one more thing for us. And then there's also some information about the website where people can go to. So what else do you want to say?
Exactly. Well, Zach touched on this a little bit earlier, but we really do want to be Toledo's symphony. And if we're going to be Toledo's symphony, we need our doors to be open to everyone in the community. And we invite everybody to come in, check us out, see what we're doing, join us on this journey as we explore great music.
Felicia, where can we find more information about all of this?
ToledoSymphony.com/North Star Festival.
So that's like all the events are there.
Yes, all of the events are listed in one location.
Including the chamber stuff.
Our website. Yes.
The chamber stuff that's coming up this weekend, yes. Romance and Spirituals. That open rehearsal is happening in the afternoon between 1 and 4 o'clock around there. And then the concert is 7 o'clock p.m. There's also Kathleen Battle, an amazing concert that's coming up in a few weeks that we're going to be talking about next week. And also I Dream, the opera by Douglas Tappan over at Toledo Opera. So many more things to talk about as we continue the conversation over the next couple of weeks. Toledo Symphony Lab is generously underwritten by a gift from the estate of Barbara Garwood and is a production of WGTE Public Media in collaboration with our sponsor, the Toledo Symphony. You can download episodes of this program as a podcast by going to our website at wgte.org/lab or by subscribing to us on Apple Podcasts. My thanks to Zach Vassar, Merwin Sue, Felicia Canny, and Rachel Zeithamel. I'm Brad Cresswell, and you've been listening to Toledo Symphony Lab here on FM 91.